Hi, my name is Marcus Lundström, and I'm a researcher at a small institute called the Multicultural Center. We're located in the outskirts of Stockholm, Sweden, in a territorially stigmatized area called Norra Botkyrka. In our ongoing research on racism and migration, we are currently documenting oral histories concerning the corona crisis. Over 100 semi-structured interviews with community residents were conducted in the summer of 2020, and a second round of follow-up interviews is currently being finalized. I will here use this interview material to challenge the notion of the corona crisis as a singular event. Instead, I explore how this phenomenon involved multiple crises in the plural, because there's little doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has produced social and political measures that would be felt long into its afterlife. And the hazards of corona clearly follow familiar patterns of social inequality. Research shows how psychological impacts vary between social strata. People without work from home abilities are economically vulnerable, and women risk unemployment due to their performance of unpaid domestic labor during childcare lockdowns. The corona crisis, then, is not singular at all. And my claim here is that this diversity is closely entwined with plural understandings of time. My theoretical starting point builds on the observation that credibility in progress, this guiding principle of modernity, has led to deflation in chrononormative notions of progress and the previously dominating perception of time as linear. I here draw on Helge Jordheim and Einar Wiegen's argument that progress, which is a powerful tool to synchronize temporal heterogeneity into a globalized temporality. This concept of progress has lost its function due to a competing concept of global synchronization, namely crisis. So by conceptualizing phenomena in terms of, for instance, crisis of democracy, financial crisis, migrant crisis, climate crisis, or corona crisis, the concept of crisis synchronizes plural heterogeneities into singularity, eclipsing the multitude of lived experiences. So to model this polytemporality analysis, I have turned to the light cone imagery developed in theoretical physics, particular by theoretical physicist Carlo Rovelli. And a light cone, which you can see here, represents the path a beam of light takes through space-time. To illustrate polytemporality, that is the multiplicity of times, Carlo Rovelli describes how the future light cone represents events affected by an event at the cone center. And the past light cone similarly contains events that affect what is happening at the center. Now, to translate this imagery into the social sciences, I draw on the polytemporality theory of Reinhard Koselleck, the historian. And he describes how collective memories constitute the past in terms of what he calls a space of experience, which in turn projects diverse prospects and anticipations onto the future, what he calls the horizon of expectation. Then, in order to analyze the temporal features of the present, which is located at the center of this image in this platform, I draw on sociologist Barbara Adams' notions of timescape. Adam argued that just as landscapes have shifting topographies, Timescapes contain certain clusters of temporal features. So from Adam's theory, I have extracted 4 temporal clusters I find particularly useful to analyze timescapes of the corona crisis. The first cluster is called time frame, and it involves temporal divisions such as epochs, generations, lifetimes, years, weeks, months, days, seconds, minutes, and so on. The second is time order, which is the depictions of time as linear or circular or cyclical or spiral. Timescapes are also made up of tempo, the paces, the rhythms, speeds, and the compression of time. We also have timing, which is the synchronization of time of different temporalities, the being in or out of time, or at the right or wrong time. In my polytemporality analysis, these 4 clusters compose timescapes that are temporally located between a specific space of experience and horizon of expectation. These meeting cones of past and future, they differ between individuals and groups, since they contain a multitude of experiences and expectations. Now, let me show how the timescapes of the corona crisis can look for residents in this area that we're in, Norra Botkyrka in Sweden. So first of all, the time frame seems to follow the discursive notions of the corona crisis as a dramatic rupture from ordinary routines, daily attendance at school or work, weekly gatherings in mosques or churches. The collective experience of rupture interlinks with the notion of the corona crisis as an exceptional time period, a historical epoch that someday will pass. And many of the interviews here, they expressed a desire to return to normal life. And these accounts were often accompanied with hopes that society somehow had learned lessons and become better. And this particular notion, the return to a previous point in time, but on a higher level, entails a perception of spiral time. And this spiral time order really predominated their interviews' timescapes. Confidence in returning to a previous state with advanced societal knowledge was typically pursued by people that saw hope on their horizon of expectation. Other interviews instead employed a cyclical time order as comfort, and they explained how watching seasonal shifts and lunar cycles brought resilience to the state of exception invoked by the corona crisis. And interviews more inclined to despair, however, dauntingly expressed how it's all a circle. And such a circular time order was entangled with demanding experiences of waiting for the crisis to end, for the vaccine, for updated governmental decisions, for delayed surgeries, overdue social insurance payments, and for employment opportunities. Some interviews portrayed the long waiting period of their bodies recovering from COVID-19. Others waited for their turn to come down with corona. In the state of constant waiting, time became circular. So experiences of detainment were also expressed in terms of tempo, the slow pace of lingering at home, and the high speed of virtual encounters in distance education and work. And this spatial temporal reconfiguration, the norms of social distance, the closure of public spaces, and the expansion of virtual meeting fora Many of the interviews could not find balance between work and rest, activity and recovery. So this temporal dissonance interlinked with time compression that followed from vanishing changeover between activities. Time compression also entangled with time extension, this slow pace of home detainment. So this extension compression interplay produced a certain temporal rhythm of the corona timescapes. And in this regard, the corona crisis indeed functioned as a vehicle for temporal synchronization. Synchronization of diverse temporalities across localities. So the corona crisis was recurrently referred to as a singular event, a universal time period. And here the crisis terminology enabled the interviewees to look at themselves as being in the right time, that is, in the same time as everybody else. On the other hand, the interview's space of experience was also wide enough to challenge these notions of crisis in the singular. Time frames, time orders, tempos, and timings were employed differently in the typescapes of the corona crisis. And this heterogeneity included quite asynchronous meanings of crisis, meanings that disable synchronization within a supposedly universal temporality. So one interviewee, an elderly lady that had lived in Norra Botkyrka for more than 50 years, she described a crisis in terms of rupture in space and not in time. Rupture in space as displacement from her locational belonging in Norra Botkyrka, rather than a rupture in time. She said that the day I moved here, I felt this is where I want to live. When we'll have to move from here, it will be a true crisis. And I will end my presentation with that interview quote, which I believe illustrate how synchronization of global temporalities are also challenged through the diverse timescapes of the corona crisis. Thank you.